Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to another exciting live session of Avid Online. I hope all of you have been staying well, and have been tuning in to our live online sessions and also our Avid Online episodes. For those who've never attended an Avid Learning program before, a warm welcome to you. Please refer to the chat section for a brief introduction about the work we do and also more information about our partners for the evening. On the 1st of April, we launched Avid Online, our digital further learning campaign across social media. The objective was to enable our patrons and stakeholders like yourselves to engage with a range of topics across the breadth of the arts. The focus of the campaign is to keep members of the creative community connected, facilitate interactions, and exchange of ideas. We joined a growing number of institutions and other cultural practitioners to spread the positive message of the arts and its boundless knowledge and inspiration they bring by going digital. We're now into our 6th month and curated and published over 115 programs. In fact, tonight is the 117th, a mix of live sessions and Avid Online videos. We're going strong and are so grateful to our speakers and experts without whom this would not have been possible. And to you, our interested audiences who come back time and again, you tune in for our live sessions or even check out our archives at your convenience on YouTube. It actually gives truth to our mantra that learning never stops. We continue to evolve this campaign by expanding our formats, reintroducing our existing IPs, and working with our longtime collaborators to present thematic programs and series. And that brings me to our evening session. This is the final segment of the closing session of an exciting week of virtual programs, Beyond the Lens, documenting visual cultures and narratives. This specially curated thematic week of programming takes us all on an insightful journey across the disciplines of film and photography, engaging with aspects such as storytelling, heritage, society, cultural, and subcultures. We had another program planned for later in this week, a masterclass on documentary filmmaking, which has been rescheduled to December. I hope you will join us then. Tonight, the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai and Avid Learning present Beyond the Lens, Documenting Cultures, featuring our esteemed speakers, filmmaker and photographer Paul Saltzman, in conversation with journalist, anchor, and the founding editor of The Wire, Sidharth Bhatia. Welcome, Paul. Welcome, Sidharth. For more about our extremely distinguished panel, please refer to the chat section. The bios have been posted out there. They should have also been emailed to you earlier. But I'd like to specially mention that Paul has captured some of the most intimate, iconic photographs of none other than the legendary rock band, The Beatles, during their spiritual sojourn in Rishikesh in 1968. Avid has already had the honor of curating a discussion and facilitating an exhibition with Paul 2 years back in Mumbai, again partnering with the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai. In today's session, referring to Paul's own experience from both behind and beyond the lens, he and Sidharth will talk about how photography and film capture, portray, and represent cultures and traditions from around the world, how these medias demystify subtle nuances and spotlight their unique characteristics and aspects. Paul will talk about his experiences of photographing and interacting with the Beatles in India and his new film. And they will also speak of other projects like his award-winning series, Spread Your Wings, and much, much more. Very quickly, the session is about 75 minutes, followed by a Q&A. Please keep your questions ready and start submitting them in the Q&A box. So on that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Paul and Sidharth. Look forward to a fascinating session. Thank you.
So welcome, Paul. Thank you, Asad. Welcome, Paul. I think this is where you tell us, all of us, about some of the interesting aspects of your work and a little bit about your film. And you wanted to talk for a while, after which you and I will take some of those themes forward. All yours. Go ahead.
Thank you. And hello and good evening. This is a treat for me. India has played a huge part in my life, which you'll hear about as I go through and as you and I talk as well, Sidharth. A little technical question. I am a filmmaker, a photographer, but I'm not a big aficionado on the technical aspects of the computer. I use it for email and creating documents. So, okay, well, let me start. I'm from Toronto. For whatever reason, I was brought up as an atheist. I was brought up by left-wing communist parents who taught me that religion was an opiate of the peoples and that there was no God, no spirit, no soul. But what they did teach me, which was brilliant, was the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. And so for whatever reason, and I happen to believe in incarnations, I happen to believe in divine presence. I don't think God is a guy. People seem to think God is a guy. So I say God, goddess in the same phrase to cover masculine and feminine aspects of divine energy, divine presence. Why am I starting this way? I'm starting this way because for whatever reason, the question of why are we here has always been part of my existence, probably since the first time I went to India or just before that. So why are we here? Apparently, I don't mean in this Zoom. Yes, why are we here in this Zoom? But why are we here on the planet? How did I get into my body? How does it all work? And the reason these questions started for me was I had a famous television personality father who was violent. He was a boxer in university. He punched me in the face about 4 times in my teen years when he lost his temper. And so I developed fairly quickly a desire to figure out what pain was and how not to be in pain, which means, how do I go to the center of my being? How do I find peace inside? Apparently, the astronomers tell us that there are millions of suns in the universe. And if there's millions of suns, I think, oh, well, there's probably some other places where life exists. So we could probably all have our own planet. You could be alone, Sidharth, on your planet and be ruler. I could be alone on my planet. Why are we here? Well, we're here because, for me, this is Earth School. This is Earth School, and it's not such a sophisticated thought, but it's Earth School, and it's all about love. It's all about learning about love, creativity, kindness, compassion, all the good things, how to create as a human species. We are an amazing species. We create remarkably. We give birth to films and paintings and drama and all the different aspects of expression. We can love each other with joy and kindness, or not, or not. We can create rape and pillage and war and pestilence. We can do, and this is where what I believe in divine presence is, we have free will. And in terms of free will, the question to me is, so what do I want to do with it? So as a filmmaker and as a photographer, I had an epiphany in my 20s. And the epiphany was very simple. It was I could make junk food for the human psyche, for each of your psyches, for my own psyche. I could make junk food or I could make health food. And I felt it was a responsibility and even a duty to not make junk food. I don't know if you've seen the Spielberg film Gremlins, but I saw that somewhere many years ago when it came out. And there's a scene in Gremlins where once the hero gets away from all the nightmare, and there he or she, I can't even remember that, I just know the image. They're flying on an airplane, and it's like, whew, whew, the evil is gone. And that person looks out the window, and all of a sudden, there's one gremlin on the tip of the airplane wing, and he hasn't or she hasn't gotten away. Why am I saying this? I fly a lot. Occasionally, when I look out the window, I see a flash of that scene, just occasionally, because it's in my memory, because in that film, Spielberg put into my psyche a terrifying image. And that image flashes every once in a while. So I decided in my 20s that I did not wish to put images into people's psyches or emotions or postulations or anything else that was junk food. Okay, so I went to university. I failed university. I have an interesting picture here. I'm not sure how to bring it up, that one. So that's me as a cheerleader at the University of Toronto. I'm 21 years old. Aisha, how do I come back to the main screen? There it is, okay. And what happened was I went into engineering, and I went into engineering because my guidance counselor said you should go into engineering, and I didn't know who I was. So I said, duh, okay, and I proceeded to go through 4 years of university, and the only joyful thing was being a cheerleader, and because I was in completely the wrong course. I was in maths, physics, and chemistry, and then I switched to engineering science. And what happened was that I got thrown out of university for failing too many times. I was so ashamed of that I didn't tell my own brother for 10 years. And the reason I'm saying this is that all of this was part of my trajectory for what I wanted to make in films and what I wanted to share with you, the other, in that sense. Last night was the worldwide premiere of my film, Meeting the Beatles in India. It was a complete joy. It was a 15-year project, and obviously Sidharth and I will talk about that. But how did I get to that place? And not only that, so how does filmmaking interact with culture and photography, and where do I put myself in that? And literally, if I'm behind the camera, what am I seeing and what am I choosing? If I'm making a film, if I'm directing and I'm cutting and I'm writing, how do I want to present that? And how do I want to interact in that sense with culture? So in directing and in making films, I would say, and in photography, but you see, this is all just universal. In human life, I love intimacy. I do not love control. And what we tend not to know is that the opposite of intimacy is in fact control. And the opposite of control is intimacy. So as a director, if I'm trying to control everything, I'm going to kill the intimacy in my work. If I'm trying to tell you how to deliver a line in a drama, I'm taking away your creativity. I'm telling you, deliver the line like this, say it like that. And a lot of directors work that way. A friend of mine works with Clint Eastwood a lot, and he told me how Clint Eastwood directs. And he said Clint Eastwood, and he worked on Unforgiven. So in a scene, there's Morgan Freeman and Gene Hackman. I'm forgetting who else is in the scene, but major actors, major talent. And the way Clint Eastwood does it is he says, okay, I'm going to start the camera here. I'll start on a medium close-up of Eugene, and then I'm going to move the camera over there, and I'm going to end up on a medium wide shot of you, Morgan. Now run the scene. And he watches them run the scene. He doesn't tell them where to move. He doesn't tell them how to deliver lines. He literally lets them invent from their own characters how they're going to move about in the room, in the scene. And he runs a rehearsal once, and then he says, okay, I'm going to change that a little bit. Instead of starting here, I'm going to start there. Instead of ending there, I'm going to end there. And then he starts shooting, take one, take two, take three. He almost never does more than 3 takes. What I'm giving you an example of is how you don't control as a director. You set the stage, you choose the elements in the frame, and then you allow people to be themselves, whether in a documentary or in a drama. So the way I direct documentaries is the same way. And one other thing to say about it is that in storytelling and in interacting with others, so this is all about culture and interacting with culture, whether I'm making a film in Mississippi or on civil rights or the Beatles in India, or I did a series of 26 half-hour films on creativity in young people, And that idea got born in India, in Agra. And the first films I made were in Jaipur and in nearby a tiny village in Kashmir. And in directing those films and in making those films, and I do have some pictures here I think I can show you. Let's see how I can find them. So can you see that image?
Yes.
Okay, so that's a still from the series called Spread Your Wings, which is the 26 films that started in India on creativity in young people. This happens to be a young man, a boy in Morocco, and he's learning how to make saddles for horses, and it's an ancient tradition. And the old man sitting down as his guru, so to speak, and the man standing beside him is his other teacher. And this started in Kashmir, and I'd like to find that shot and show you that one. Can you see this one?
Yes.
So this is the young man who was weaving carpets in a tiny village. And the whole point of this series really began when I was filming in Agra in 1972. And I was watching young boys do inlaid marble work. And as I said, I got thrown out of university and I was ashamed of it. And I'm watching these young boys do marble work in the shadows of the Taj Mahal. And I'm thinking, well, what they're doing is highly creative. You know, we didn't have the same concept back then of child labor. Was it bad that they were children? Were they supporting their families? Was that good? I don't know. I don't know enough about that. I just know that for me, there was an epiphany. I thought, well, these people, these young fellows, whether it's fellows or girls, they're learning traditional forms of creativity in a relationship with a master, whether a parent or another elder. And they're learning a tradition of passing down from generation to generation creativity. And so I made 26 half-hour films about that, the passing down of creative traditions from one generation to the next in different cultures. So let me see how I come back to the main screen. Thank you. So what I'm trying to say here is there's a connection for me in my life between the inner life and the outer life, between my own spirit and soul, and how do I become in tune with that, and how do I come from that being in tune in my work, in my creative work, in whether I make junk food or health food for the audience, for others. So for me, this has been a sacred journey. It's a sacred journey that began in India. I flew to India when I was 23 years old first. I landed in Mumbai. It was the middle of the night. I'd never been out of North America. The culture, the smells, the sounds, the heat just wham, hit me, which it does to most tourists who land in India in the middle of the night. But what happened was that over the next 48 hours, I had an experience of my body opening up, my breathing getting deeper and more calm. Something happened when I arrived in India. And personally, I think lifetimes exist. I think reincarnation is real. And I think what happened was I had other lifetimes or a lifetime in India, because from the first time I landed in India in those first few days to today, India became a second home for me, in my heart, in my soul. I've been to India now more than 60 times. I've made films in India. I was married to an Indian woman. I have a daughter who's half Indian, half Canadian. Her name's Debyani. She said one day to me, "Dad, I'm a Hindu Jew." And so for me, this sacred journey in terms of creativity involves a lot of different films. I've done about 70 documentaries and about 250 dramas. I'm not saying those numbers to brag. I'm just saying that's been my creative output. And the motivation for that creative output is to explore the world and to share it. early in my career, I made a film on a bakery in Toronto, a family of bakers. And it took me 2 years to convince them to let me film them in their bakery, because their bakery was always filled with joy. Every time you went in there, it was packed, and every time people were laughing and joking and buying wonderful baked goods that tasted remarkable. They had such love in their product. And I made that film, and it won a bunch of awards, and I was interviewed for the very first time, and the interviewer said, "Why do you make the films you make?" And it was like, whoa, I'd never thought of that. And I had to think for a moment, and what I said to that interviewer was, I make films about people that give me courage to encourage others to pass that along. So that's my life in storytelling, is to make films that are usually true stories that give me courage, that hold up the example of what heart and soul can be in this human journey of ours. Okay, so Sidharth, why don't you take over, and let's take this in whatever direction you think works best.
Okay, thanks, Paul. That was very, that was an excellent background of your journey, inner and outer, if I may say, and which brings us perfectly to where we are heading next over the next 30, 40 minutes. And that is that your, what you haven't told us, which I would love you to talk about a little bit, there'll be follow-up questions, so you can give them in answers in parts, is how that inner voice at 23, in the film you explain it really well, in the film that you have just released, you explain it really well by saying, I was sitting in my room and I got up, and inner voice said to me, what the hell is going on with you, basically. You've got success, including the sports car. But what next? And that inner voice said to you, India. And you landed here to work on a project, a film project, as a sound recordist with little or no knowledge of sound recording.
Right.
Which is how it should be, really, when you think about it. And then after you finished your work, you went to Delhi, and one letter from overseas changed your life. So take it away from there and tell us, briefly what happened.
Sure. I want to say thank you for that. I want to say that I'm a little shy about these things, because I don't think it matters how many films I've made. I don't think it matters how rich you are. I don't think it matters what car you drive. I think what matters is how you are integrated within yourself. Are you happy? Are you joyful? Do you create good in the world? Do you not create good in the world? So whether I'm sitting with Morgan Freeman or the Beatles, what happens is they're just people to me. I know that sounds cliched, but somehow or other, in that way, they're not icons. They're just breathing people. So what happened in Montreal, and what Sidharth is asking about, is that I was 23. I thought I was successful. I'd already been the co-host of a youth public affairs national television show on Canadian broadcasting. I'd already done civil rights work in Mississippi, registering voters. I felt good about myself. And I woke up one morning, I was working at the National Film Board of Canada, and I woke up one morning in my little rented room, and I had the shocking thought that there were parts of myself I didn't like, and I was shocked because I wasn't a very conscious young man. So I sat up on the edge of my bed with this shocking thought, and I said out loud without thinking, and this is very important in my life, and I think in our lives, this is a wonderful computer up here in our head. It's a shitty guidance system. Here in the heart chakra is a wonderful guidance system. It's a shitty computer. So, in fact, the best thing in life is to integrate your head and your heart. And I've spent a lot of time consciously working on that. So I sit up on the edge of my bed and I hear myself say out loud without thinking, it came from deep inside. I said, what do I do about this not liking parts of myself? And I heard my soul talk to me for the first time. I didn't believe in a soul. Like I said, I was brought up to believe there's no God, there's no soul, there's no spirit. But in that moment, I hear this deep, resonant, all-loving, all-calming inner voice. So if you can imagine that, all-loving, all-calming. Whoa, isn't that special? And of course, we all have that. And that inner voice said to me, and I remember word for word, it said, well, Paul, if you really want to look at yourself more carefully, you might want to get away from the environment you grew up in. And I said out loud in this strange conversation without thinking, I said out loud, where do I go? And that inner voice said, India. Now, I had no conscious connection with India. I had no interest. I didn't know meditation, wasn't mysticism. None of this was on my radar. India was not on my radar. But I got a job, as Sidharth mentioned, recording sound on a National Film Board film. I lied to get the job. The director said, have you ever done sound? I said, absolutely. So then I had to go learn how to do sound without telling him I didn't know how to do sound. But I then worked on the film in India. I got to Delhi. I got a letter from my girlfriend, who I loved a lot, and she loved me. We had both cried a lot when we said goodbye in Canada because we didn't want to be apart. And I got a letter from her 6 weeks later after being on the road up the West Coast through Gujarat, across Rajasthan into Delhi. And I got my first letter and I excitedly opened it. And the first line was, Dear Paul, I've moved in with Henry. And I was devastated. I was shattered. It was the worst heartbreak. Probably all of you have had a heartbreak in your life. Probably most of us, if not everybody, has. Apparently heartbreaks are essential at least once to bring us greater compassion. So I didn't know what to do. And a friend said, why don't you try meditation for the heartbreak? And that led me to the Maharishi's Ashram in Rishikesh. I got to the gates and I said, I've come to learn meditation. The gate was locked and they called a young man named Raghavendra, who turned out to be my angel. I said, I've come to learn meditation. He said, I'm sorry, the ashram is closed because the Beatles and their wives are here and we're doing a course for TM teachers. And I didn't even know the Beatles were India. Now, they were already important in my life because the song Tomorrow Never Knows from the Revolver album in 1966 had spoken about turn off your mind and float downstream. It is not dying. It is not dying. Go towards the light. It is shining. And I remember thinking, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? So that was my first curiosity about, is there an inner journey? So I arrive at the gates. I can't get in. I say, can I wait? And I wait outside the gate for 8 days. And finally, I'm allowed in. And the fact that the Beatles are there is not good news at first, because I'm in agony, I'm in heartbreak, I'm in mourning, I'm in grief, all of those emotions are flowing through me. But I get in and Raghavendra teaches me meditation, gives me a mantra. He says, you're now welcome to spend your days in the ashram and spend your time, take your meals with us, but you'll still have to sleep in the tent outside because there's no beds. I said, great. And I did a 30-minute meditation. And I came out of the meditation and it was an absolute miracle. The agony was gone. The heartbreak wasn't gone. That took a couple of years. I still kept wanting to be back with Trisha, my girlfriend, and it never happened. But the agony was gone in 30 minutes. And I was in a state of bliss. And George Harrison, a few days later said to me, I get higher meditating than I ever did on drugs. And I knew what he meant because I had just experienced it. So I came out of the room and I'm walking through the ashram and I'm not even thinking of Beatles. They're not even in my mind. I'm just so relieved not to be in agony and I'm in a state of bliss. And I saw them and I walked over and sat down with them. So that was the beginning of that process. It took till 3 years ago till I started making a film about that whole experience, which opened last night.
So you sat down with them and they didn't turn you away saying, go away, you fan, or do you want an autograph, or that we want to be alone here. They didn't do any of that.
No, and I'll just tell you briefly how come, and it's kind of magical. Sidharth, about 15 years ago or 10 years ago, I started finding myself using the word magical in a specific way. And I knew what I meant, but I didn't know the dictionary definition of what I meant. And I went to the big Oxford Etymological Dictionary that's sitting in my bookshelf over there, and I pulled it out, and I looked up magical, and there were 25 meanings for magical. And I start reading down, and I realized that the number one meaning is the most common, and number two is the second most common, which is how the dictionary is arranged. And way down at around number 23 or 24, I find exactly what I'm looking for, and it says, and I quote, "Magic, that which is real, but we as yet do not understand." That which is real, but as yet we do not understand. So I walk over to the Beatles. I see John sitting at a table. I can tell Paul's back is to me. I can't see who else is at the table because it's in the trees. And I just find myself curving in this state of bliss. It literally was not a thought. It wasn't, oh, Beatles, I'll go over there. It was literally my body just curved, and I'm now walking towards them, and I'm halfway to them, and I notice, oh, my heart's beating a little faster. But in that altered state of bliss, I was detached from that. I wasn't, in excitement. I get to the end of the table, and they're talking, and then they stop talking because somebody's standing there, and I didn't want to interrupt. And John looks up at me, and I just said, "May I join you?" Just like that, just like talking to you. "May I join you?" And he says, "Sure, mate, pull up a chair." And Paul turns to me and says, "Come and sit here." And he pulls a chair to the end of the table, and I sit down. And three magical things happen. That's why I used the word magic. First of all, to my shock, I hear in my head a scream, "Eek, it's the Beatles." Now, I saw them live in Toronto in 1964. I never screamed, "Eek, it's the Beatles." I was just trying to hear them over the screaming crowd. And before I can think, again, that's the important part, before thought distracted me, John turns to, I hear my soul talk to me for the second time in my life. And it says this, it says, "Hey, Paul, they're just ordinary people like you. Everyone farts and is afraid in the night." That's what it said. And in that moment, John turns to me, and before I have a chance to think, again, it's in the flow, as we talk about being in the flow of life, of creativity, John turns to me, and he's teasing me in the way that the Brits often feel superior to the Yankees, the former colony. And he turns to me and he says, "Ah, you're American then?" And I say, "No, Canadian." And he turns to the rest of the group and he says, "Ah, you see, he's from one of the colonies." Now we're all laughing. And he turns back to me and he says, "So you're still worshiping Her Highness then?" And he's teasing me, but he's being very tart, very smart, and really a dear man, John Lennon. And he turns to me and he says, "You're still worshiping Her Highness?" And I say, "No, not personally." And then Paul and Ringo start teasing me about having the Queen on our money. And I say, "Well, we may have the Queen on our money, but hey, she lives with you guys." So we're all laughing. And so that was it. They just took me into their group. So what I think happened, Sidharth, was the fan screamed in my head. The soul spoke to it. That fan went away. I spent a week with them. I literally never thought of them as the Beatles again. I know that sounds weird. I could have had my photos with them. They were buddies for a week and the bigger group. Mia Farrow, Donovan, Mike Love of the Beach Boys, Mal Evans, their roadie, their partners, Cynthia Lennon, Pattie Boyd, George's wife, Maureen Starkey, Ringo's wife, and Jane Asher, Paul's girlfriend. We just sat around for a week when people weren't meditating and they weren't writing music. And I never asked for a picture or anything. And I believe sincerely that they were so open with me, and the pictures are so intimate because they were so open with me, because I didn't want anything from them. I didn't want anything from them. I got what I came for. The meditation healed the broken heart, or healed the agony.
But at some stage when you must have said, "Can I take your pictures?" That particular moment, did it sound like a natural thing to do to them and to you?
Yeah, because what happened was that we would sit around at this long table by the cliff and have chai and cookies and take our meals in the dining room. And again, people would wander away and come back. But that table by the cliff seemed to be where the famous folks congregated and where I would hang out with them. And they were taking pictures of each other. It really was like a family picnic. They had, each of them had high-end Nikons. I had my little cheap Pentax. And I used Ektachrome 64 transparency film. I had lots of film. I only took 54 pictures of anyone famous. I only took out my camera twice. But what happened was I saw them taking pictures of each other. And it was really literally like an outing, like, these four couples. And after a couple of days, I asked each of them individually, because literally I wasn't thinking of Beatles. So when I had a moment with Ringo or Paul or John or George, I said, do you mind if I take the odd picture? And each of them said, take as many as you want. Go ahead. Like it was nothing. It was nothing. People said to me, did you realize it was a historic time? No, I was just hanging out with these new friends. And it was really like that. So I only took out my camera twice. Because I just didn't think of it. One of my joys as a filmmaker, one of my joys as a storyteller and Meeting the Beatles in India, was that I could use graphic novel illustrations to create the scenes that occurred that there's no footage of, that there's no film of. I could tell those stories about George changed my life in, 3 sentences that he said to me when we were sitting together, and John as well. So, yeah, no, they didn't mind at all.
No, so that film I saw, and you got some really, really touching sequences of John saying something to you, and he's personally going through his own issues at that time. I won't get into the story very closely because I think we should leave something for the audience. But while you're taking these pictures, the one that most of them are candid, but the one you've taken, that big photograph, which has become the signature photograph of that time, of the Maharishi sitting in the middle and all of these people. Do you have it with you here?
I do. I'm just going to find it here. I've got a few.
There are a couple of questions that I've always wanted to ask about those pictures, that particular one.
Right.
Show us a few first, but then we'll come back to that particular photograph, if you've got a couple of them in sequence.
So can you see it now, or do I have to?
Just press that green button.
Press the green button. There we go. So, all right. So this photo is the one you're talking about.
That's right.
Do you want to see some of the others now, or talk about this one?
Now, let's talk about this for a minute or two.
Sure.
So tell us, how did this get arranged? Because, I remember somebody from Sotheby's, that the colors are very rich and pure. And you open them after 20, 30 years. So the box after 30 years, but the colors still have held beautifully. The sunlight is just outstanding. And everybody is in focus. So your cheap Pentax, wasn't that bad.
Right.
But tell us a little more about how this got arranged.
So what happened was I had the Pentax. I had 2 lenses, a 50 millimeter and a 135. This was taken on the 50 millimeter. I just saw people starting to gather, and I saw people dressed up, and somebody came and put a garland around my head, and they were all gathering. It had nothing to do with me. And the Maharishi had hired a photographer from the town below, from Rishikesh. And you know how age works, right? Like I'm now 76 years old. It blows my mind. I still play ice hockey twice a week. It's like, what, 76? That's crazy. Isn't that supposed to be decrepit? We have such strange impressions when we're young of what aging is. That old adage, youth is wasted on the young. I think that's a half truth. So what I'm saying that is he hired a photographer from the town below. To me, it was an old man. This old man came up with his big 8x10 plate camera. I think he must have been 40 years old, but I was 24, so he was an old man. And he set up and he started taking these pictures. Now, what happened was that before they all sat down in this pose is the Maharishi's construct. There was 60 other people at the ashram, the other people you see behind them, and they were there to take a 3-month course to become TM teachers, Transcendental Meditation teachers. And the Maharishi had a seating plan, and he directed everyone where to sit, and of course the famous 4 are sitting in front of him. And as they're getting all ready, and I've got my camera, Mal Evans, their roadie, comes over to me and he hands me his Nikon and says, "Here, can you take some pictures for me?" And seeing that, Ringo walks over to me and hands me his Nikon and says, "Can you take some pictures for me?" And then George walks over and hands me his Nikon. So I've got 4 cameras around my neck. And I just started taking pictures just as this all unfolded.
And this is yours. So clearly they got similar ones, and you got a lot of other candidates. There are a couple of photographs of John and Paul together, and you can feel the energy. There are more than a couple here. You can just feel the energy here about what's going on, and you've taken it, and clearly it's taken from afar because you can see some fence. Look at this. I mean, just look at this. Wearing a casual kurta and most relaxed, because otherwise they are being chased by paparazzi. And a lot of creativity came out of this, didn't it?
Yes. Yeah. Their time at the ashram was, I believe, their single most creative period in their whole history as a group. They wrote at the ashram, and there's a lovely discussion in my film between me and Mark Lewison, who's considered the foremost Beatles historian, about how many songs were written at the ashram. I was told 48 by somebody who was told that by McCartney right after he returned from India. The head of Apple Films, Dennis O'Dell, asked Paul and John when they were sitting together, how many songs did you guys write at the ashram? And Paul said 48. And Dennis, who heard that, told me, Paul told him 48. Mark said that probably it's more like 30 because as a historian, they can only find 30 songs, right? But it was their most single, I think, creative period in their history, whether it was 30 songs or 48, it was in less than 8 weeks that they wrote those songs. And so in effect, for me, I love this one of George. There's a great story about that maybe we can come to, but for me, the opportunity to make the film was an opportunity to talk about meditation, creativity, the inner journey. How does creativity relate to the inner self, to meditation, which takes you into the inner self? So that's part of the motivation for me to make the film, and it was just a joy to tell the different stories of it.
So I'm sure in the audience there are lots of hardcore Beatles followers and fans and Beatles buffs, and they know it all. But for a few who may not know all the details, the White Album came out of much of the work that was done here, including, the fantastic. The White Album came out of this, Paul, including several songs like Raccoon and of course, Sexy Sadie, which is a controversial song in its own way.
Right.
And this is lovely. You were going to say something about the George photograph?
Oh, yeah, it's just a sweet story. Let me go back to it for a second here. So there's a woman, you probably know of her, and maybe some of the other people listening in know of her. Her name is Astrid Kirchner. And Astrid took the iconic pictures of the Beatles in the very beginning when they were playing in clubs in Hamburg, Germany. And they were right at the beginning of their career. They were a rock and roll band. They wore leather jackets. They had long hair. It wasn't until their manager, Brian Epstein, came into the picture and took over that they changed to the Beatles haircuts that became famous and wearing matching suits without collars on the jackets. But before that, Astrid Kirchner took the iconic pictures you can find online, and Astrid became a very close friend of the Beatles. And I met her at a Beatles convention in Berlin, 15 years ago. And she looked at this picture and she said, I told George not to have his tooth changed. So you see his incisor tooth that's sort of sticking down there. George was embarrassed at the size of that tooth, and he had a dentist grind it down to be fitting the size of his other teeth. And Astrid's telling me this story, saying, I told him not to do that. She thought that that was one of his beauty points, that particular tooth and that smile. So that was just a very sweet thing. She said, I love your pictures. And I was surprised. And she said, why are you so surprised? I said, I didn't know you'd even seen them. She said, oh no, I've seen them. And I said, well, I'm happy to give you one or all of them in whatever size. And she said, I live in a small apartment in Berlin. I would like one this big. And the one she wanted was this picture.
And of course, you must have heard some of the songs while they were being made. Am I right?
I heard Obladi Oblada being composed back here when I took this picture through the fence. And the fence is really to keep goats out of the garden. And I walked through the gate and I took a shot of John. I'm not sure if I have it here. I was hoping I would have it here to show you. It's one of those iconic shots of John where he's scratching his ear. There's another shot, but while I look for the other one. But I walked through the gate and I just said, hi guys. And they said, hi Paul. And I sat down over beside Ringo. And so I was sitting beside Ringo on the left there. And they were just fooling around. They were playing bits of things I had heard before. Michelle, Eleanor Rigby, they were just doing an ad hoc medley, and some of the things I was hearing I'd never heard before, didn't recognize. And then they started singing Obladi Oblada, La La How the Life Goes On. And they're singing it over and over again, and with a lot of joy. And what I realized sitting there was that that's where their music came from their joy. And I know that when a Beatles song comes on the radio, if I'm driving my car, all of a sudden I'm smiling. And I think one of the reasons they are still so prevalent in the world is two reasons. One, their joy, and the music came from their joy. And the other is when they got into the deeper connections with themselves and they started writing songs about Within You, Without You, and Tomorrow Never Knows. And they were exploring their own consciousness, their own inner journey. And I think, to me, that's the two facets of their creativity. And of course, joy is a state of creativity. And creativity is a state of joy in terms of the energy of creation in all of us, not just artists, and everybody, how we create our lives, how we arrange our lives. You know, all of our lives in a certain way are blank canvases. Now we start to paint them, and if we don't like it, we need to repaint sections of our life. We need to change ourselves if we're finding that our lives aren't giving us the joy and the creativity and the pleasure. So they were singing Obladi Oblada Bra La La The Life Goes On over and over and over again, bending it faster, slower. And they paused to take a breath. And they paused for like a minute and just rested. And just after I took one of the pictures, Paul looked up at me and he said, that's all there is so far. We don't have any of the words yet. So that was the refrain. And that was the only song I was present while they were writing. There was another song that I heard there, and I'll go back to one of the. I'm sorry?
I'm just anticipating. Is that Dear Prudence?
No, it's The Inner Light, the song The Inner Light. I was gone by the time the Prudence thing happened, but this picture is called The Inner Light, and it's called The Inner Light because of George. What happened was that after 2 or 3 days after I got in the ashram and learned meditation, and I'm just hanging out and I'm meditating and I'm hanging out with them and all of that, Raghavendra, the angel in my life, who when he said, I'm sorry, the ashram's closed, he's pointed across the dirt path, and under the trees were 2 old army tents. And he said the first one is being used by the tailor who comes up from Rishikesh and is making these clothes that you see people wearing, making to measure all of the blouses and kurtas and saris and everything, whatever he was making. And he said, the other tent's empty, you can sleep there. And I said, thank you. And then he said, and we'll send you our simple vegetarian meals. So he fed me for 8 days. This was an angel in my life in the middle of a heartbreak. So a couple of days into the time I was there, he came over to me and he said, okay, come on, it's time to meet the Maharishi. And I thought, great, I'd like to talk to him. I'd like to listen to him. And we go to his bungalow and we go into a meditation room, and it's all white futons on the floor. And it's a room that holds, say, 50 people, 60 people. And we sit down in front of the low dais that Maharishi would come and sit on. And no one was in the room except me and Raghavendra. And then I hear voices and people taking off their sandals, and in walk George and Paul and John and Ringo and their partners. And now there's 10 of us crunched together in front of where the Maharishi is going to sit. And the Maharishi comes in and we all namaste and namaste. And he was very funny. He had a very good sense of humor, the Maharishi. And he saw that George had brought in a little black tape recorder. Those old tape recorders with the buttons on the end that you push. And he said to George, is that a new song, or would you like me to recite the Bhagavad Gita? And we all laughed, of course. And he said, no, it's a new song. And he pressed the play button. Now, George is sitting right next to me. Our knees are almost like touching 2 inches apart. And out of the tape recorder comes this new song, The Inner Light, that had just been recorded that I had never heard. And George is sitting there and he starts singing with himself. So he's singing out of the tape recorder and he's singing live. The Maharishi never did notice me. We never did have a conversation in the week I was there. And it didn't matter. Didn't matter. I'd already gotten the gift of meditation. I'd already had that transformative experience. Now I'm sitting there listening to a brand new Beatles song. So that's why I call this The Inner Light.
So quickly, Paul, tell us about the film now. You said it took 15 years. A lot of that would involve setting it up, setting up interviews, convincing people. You've got some wonderful names in the movie, Patty Boyd and David Lynch, who's a great fan of meditation. You've got all of that. You've got shots of them arriving in India, and you've got shots of the ashram as it is today. So tell us how you made the film.
Okay.
And what kind of journey has it been?
So, of the 15 years of trying to get it made, 12 years was trying to convince Apple, the Beatles company, to work with me because of what I was wanting to do. Creativity, their creative explosion. And Apple's a small company, and they said, well, we're busy and we only work with a few people and we only do projects where we can control the whole project. Your project sounds interesting, maybe later. And that went on for 12 years. Finally, they said, no, we don't want to work with you on this for whatever reason. They're busy. They also work with big name directors, and I wasn't a big name director. They worked with Peter Jackson and Ron Howard and Martin Scorsese. So I just then started on my own. I had a partner who was with me halfway and then fell out of the project. And because of having a very limited budget, I just kind of did everything. I sat right here in my kitchen and I worked, 15, 18 hours a day. And I reached out to different people like David Lynch, and Patty and Jenny Boyd. And I found Bungalow Bill, the real Bungalow Bill, named Ricky Cook, who lives in Hawaii. And I filmed with him in Hawaii, that wonderful song, Hey Bungalow Bill, and What Did You Kill is part of it. And I found him, and one of the joys of that, besides him being an amazing guy and the real story of the tiger hunt that they wrote about, that John wrote about, was when I was sitting with him filming in Hawaii, I said, so have you been interviewed a lot? He said, you're the first. I guess no one had bothered to realize, well, there was a real Bungalow Bill, and where is he? So it just unfolded organically. And I really want to say this, and probably you all know this, when you start a creative project, your mind tries to take over. Okay, we'll do this, and we'll do this, and we'll do that, and we'll do that, and I'll put this and all of that. But the trouble is, if you try and control your creativity that way, like I said, it takes the intimacy out of it. So yes, I planned different things I wanted to shoot, but in fact, I remained open to surprises. And the surprises are always better than the thoughts. And to me, the surprises are from the heart. You follow your heart, and your heart will lead you better. Your heart will give you a better result in anything in life than your head. But you have to work together, your head and your heart. So the film unfolded. Mark Lewison, the historian, I knew him, but not well. I didn't think of him for the film. Someone else suggested him for the film. Oh, that's a great idea. So that's the kind of thing where I've produced a lot of drama, and the most common thing when I hire directors, when I'm on a television series or other films, the thing that's most common when you hire directors is how they don't like input from other people. It's like, what? Are you crazy? Take input. If I'm in the editing room and the janitor walks by sweeping the floor and stops in the door of the editing room and says, "What's that? I don't understand that." I want to hear that. I want to hear that. Oh, you don't understand that? Okay, let me try and make it understandable. So the film was a magical journey, right? Like I used the word magic. I had my ideas for it, but by just staying open and staying in the flow, it was the most joyful experience of all my filmmaking, was making this film. My second most enjoyable was the film about creativity in young people, because of going into other cultures and asking people to tell me their story, which is what was the key to the Beatles film too. Just asking people like these young people to tell me their own stories. Let me see if I can. So I'll pull up another picture here. So with the young people, I did 26 young people in 22 countries. And I would find them, and again, serendipity in a lot of the ways I could find people. And what I would do is not tell them the film I wanted to make. I wanted to make a film about their creativity. What did I know? I knew nothing of their creativity except the surface. So I would ask them to tell me about themselves, and I'd ask their parents to tell me about their lives. And then I would simply allow that story to unfold from what they were telling me themselves. So that was, that kind of joy. I'm not finding those pictures, but that's kind of the story of the Beatles in India film. And I'm thrilled it's come out, and it's come out online because of what's happening in the world with the COVID-19, the tragedy of that. And of course, cinema halls are closed. And so where this might have been in a cinema hall, it's online, but that's okay. It's even more available that way.
We've got a few more moments before questions come in, and I can see some questions have already started coming. Paul, you've shot, as you said, that's you, right?
That's Ringo showing me how to use his camera.
Okay.
And I just realized that there's another way to show you pictures. So that's me on the left with the wine-colored T-shirt and the garland around my head. And those are the 4 cameras hanging off my shoulder. And that's me taking a picture called Dear Prudence, because what you're seeing there, the woman to the right of my shoulder is Maureen Starkey, Ringo's wife. And Ringo's face and his nose is just above my camera, right beside my head. What you don't see to the left is Prudence Farrell for the song Dear Prudence. So that was that picture. Harry Belafonte. Should we talk about some of the other films? I know we've got to go to questions.
Yes, I was coming to that. As I said, we've got a few moments. And here's Harry Belafonte. One of your films had Morgan Freeman in it. So why don't you talk quickly about those kind of films that you've made? You've talked about films you made in other culture, but why don't you tell us about these films? And of course, the great Belafonte. I mean, I'm already impressed. Seriously, just about this alone. And
isn't that a gorgeous photo of him? So I made so after my civil rights work, I came back. I was in jail for 10 days because of the civil rights work in Mississippi. I wrote some articles from jail. I was so blown away by what I was experiencing, and I didn't know I was a storyteller until I started writing these letters from jail and smuggling them out through our civil rights lawyers. And it turned out that I just mailed them to the newspaper in Toronto. Literally, I didn't even know. I just put Toronto Star, Toronto, Canada, no name, no address. Turns out they were printing them on the front page of the paper, right? Toronto boy in Mississippi jail. It made a good headline. So I went back 43 years later. I had a run-in with a Ku Klux Klan member during my civil rights days. This is him with his gun. I'm sorry, it's a bit small. I don't think I can make it. Oh, I can make it bigger. So that's DeLay de la Beckwith. His father was the man who murdered Medgar Evers, a civil rights leader. DeLay was in the Ku Klux Klan. This is DeLay's pocket knife, Ku Klux Klan pocket knife. So I went back to Mississippi and I found him 43 years later, and I made a film called The Last White Night, Is Reconciliation Possible? And it was really about, could these two people, he had punched me in the head, I got away from him and his three friends, or I would have been either dead or really badly hurt. And 43 years later, I found him and said, can we talk? And he said, okay. And so I filmed him 5 times over 5 years and other scenes. This is us sitting in a motel room with 2 cameras, no film crew, because I didn't want anyone in the room. If I'm going to have an intimate conversation with him, it's like if I'm having an intimate conversation with you in Mumbai, Sidharth, we're not going to invite a film crew in unless we want the whole thing to change, right? So I set up 2 cameras and I set up the microphones, and I know enough to do that. And I filmed 5 interviews with him. And so in that film, Harry Belafonte is in that film because Harry was one of the 5 main advisors to Martin Luther King Jr. And I knew of Harry, and I got in touch with him and said, I was a civil rights worker and I know you were there. And would you come to Mississippi and let me film you in the room you slept with when you were in Mississippi, which was the same room I slept in the year later with a family that put us up, very courageously put us up because it was dangerous. They had their front door shot out by the Ku Klux Klan. Luckily, nobody got hurt. So this is an interview with Harry that's in the film. I'll just show you something else here. If I can work this. That's the prom film. I'll come back to that. So this is DeLay de la Beckwith at a film festival. And I've won a couple of Emmy Awards, which is sweet. That's nice. But the 2 awards I love the most that I won, that I feel the best about, I won for the film The Last White Night. And one of them was at the Crossroads Film Festival in Jackson, Mississippi. So you're in the center of what's still one of the most or more racist states. And the film award was called the most transformative film of the festival, likely to change hearts and minds and perhaps history. That's what's written on the award. Well, what's better than that as a filmmaker? Nothing's better. An Oscar would not be better. An Oscar would help my career, but it wouldn't be better than. And the other award it won was from the Napa Valley Film Festival. It won a special jury award for the most thought-provoking film. Yes, that's why I make films, to be thought-provoking and to be transformative. This is the audience asking DeLay de la Beckwith questions. And he was very brave. He was very brave to show up, as a Klan member, to show up in front of an audience that by nature would have been fairly liberal. I have a lovely picture of Morgan here somewhere. That's watching the film together.
Yes, Morgan Freeman starts your documentary on the Beatles. So Paul, this is the last question from me. After that, we shift to the audience. Again, as I said, there are a lot of questions. What a great man. So my last question is a question that I think you should think about when you answer it. Is, I know you're going to say it will come from within and all that, but what's next? Can you really top all this work?
Well, I'll tell you, I've directed featured documentaries. I've directed short dramas. I've never directed a feature drama, which becomes a challenge because in our strange world, people think if you've never done something before, you don't know how to do it. Well, you know, that's sometimes true. So I'm trying to find the money now. See, the issue to me is one of the things I learned in my work, Sidharth, is we have unlimited creativity. Human beings, creativity is unlimited. There's no end to it. It's like love. Love is unlimited. There's no end to it. If we would really grok that in our lives, we wouldn't be such a desperate species, right? Looking for creativity, looking for fame, looking for fortune, looking for love, struggling with it. So what's next? I'm trying to find the money to make one of 4 feature films that I just love. Each of them is a true story. One of them is called Chappie and Me, and it's a 1939 true story baseball film. Morgan Freeman's agreed to play the co-lead if I pay him. He said, I'll play the co-lead. I like your script. You'll just have to pay me, Paul. So I'm looking for the money to pay Morgan. It's a beautiful film about race relations and baseball in 1939. The film that I would like to make most in my life, if I can ever get it done, is a film about Paul Robeson, who I'm named after. My parents named me after Paul Robeson, the Black civil rights leader, Black singer, lawyer, football star, one of the early heroes of the civil rights movement in the 40s. And that film is about a human being whose grandfather was a slave and comes out of that tradition, graduates from Princeton as a lawyer, gets a job in a fancy New York firm and just finds the racism to be such that he leaves being a lawyer. And at one point, he's the highest paid concert singer in the world. He's an actor, a star athlete, just an amazing example of a human being's life journey. I'd love to make that film. I buy lottery tickets, Sidharth. I think if I win a big lottery, I can fund my own films. But until then, I have to look for the funds. You know, one of the things that happened before in my India connection, and I'll just answer this quickly or say this quickly. In 1968, on the trip to India, when I got the letter from Tricia saying I've moved in with Henry, and I was heartbroken, and I finished working on the Film Board film, and I walked out of the Oberoi Hotel in Delhi, where I was staying, and the Film Board was paying for that. But I was finished the job, and I had to find somewhere to live and stay in Delhi for a while longer. And I was pretty broke because I spent all my money, my salary of $500 to get to India. The air ticket was $550, as you learn in the film. And I come out of the Oberoi, and the Canadian High Commissioner, James George, is coming in, and I'd already met him. And he said, how are you doing? And good, and blah, blah, blah. And he said, why don't you come and stay at the official residence with me and Carol at number 4 Aurangzeb Road in Delhi? And it was a godsend because I didn't know where I was going to sleep that night. And I went back years later and I made a film about him because he was the most conscious, mindful person I'd ever met until that time. Yep. I kind of lost where that was going. I'm a visual person, and I was right there outside the Oberoi as I'm telling you that back a few decades, and I'm sorry I lost the track of what you had asked.
Okay, so there are a lot of questions. I'll go in sequence. And because there are a lot of questions, Paul, appreciate if you can quickly attend to, because we want to answer all of them.
I will be brief.
Sorry?
I will be brief.
Yeah. So the first one is, hi, Paul, please talk about your spiritual experience and your insights.
Well, I mean, you know, hearing my soul talk to me was my first spiritual experience. Learning meditation showed me that there was an inner world that was rejuvenating and healing. I've worked with a number of spiritual teachers over the years. I've never looked for a guru. For whatever reason, the guru-student relationship was never my thing. The concept of looking up to somebody, I look up to lots of people, but it's not my normal pattern of relationship. But I found some wonderful teachers in consciousness, and I meditate, not very disciplined, not very every day, but what I do every day is I talk to my higher self. I talk to my soul. And, you know, it's an interesting thing. If there is divine presence in the universe, and I believe there is, and I've discovered it, and I've experienced it, contrary to my parents' beliefs, what's our relationship with it? Well, you can address it directly. You know, whether it's God, goddess, that presence is only present to be all loving. So I talk to my soul every day for maybe a minute or 30 seconds or 2 minutes, and it's always magical.
The second one is, can you tell us a little bit more about, it's a long question, so I'll give you the gist of it, Paul. Can you tell us a bit about interacting and capturing cultures different from your own through film and photography, given that it requires an intimate interaction?
Right.
How do you break down cultural barriers and make people comfortable for them to tell their stories?
Great question. So the answer is simple, really. And I'm sorry, but life is simple in its core, in the root of everything. There is a simplicity. What I do is when I meet somebody, whether it's at a party or on the street, if somebody says, "How are you, Paul?" I actually ask myself, "How am I?" and I answer. If I ask somebody else, "How are you?" I'm really asking the question, and I'm ready to listen. So the key for me is I find people thrilling. I don't find bad people thrilling. They scare me. But I find people in general thrilling. And so if I'm going to be making a film, it doesn't matter what culture it is, whether it's in Mississippi with poor blacks that I've filmed in, or whether it's rich people that I've filmed with. To me, honestly, they are just breathing. You know, we're a very tender species, and I see the tenderness in others, and I try and honor that and in myself. So I think if I could sum up this question in one word, and it really is the best thing I've learned in my whole life, and that is that the best thing is to just receive the other, receive universal love, receive your partner, receive your children, receive your parents, meaning open your heart and allow what is there to manifest itself without trying to control it. So that's how I work with cultures, whether it's mine or someone else's, it's all the same to me.
Okay, great. As a young writer and an aspiring filmmaker, I've always found film to be a bit overwhelming. At the end of every filmmaking experience, I'd be completely changed and grateful for the journey. How do I continue making films and not let the nerves get to me? I don't know why this questioner, she's saying it is nerves, because this is a wonderful, energizing experience.
Well, it again goes to the core. What is nervousness? What is it? How do we deal with it? Well, number one, what it is in my experience is it's fear of failure. And where does that come from? That comes from, in me, the perfection paradigm. Children, when they have any kind of lack of security in the family, for me, it was a violent, angry father. My mother was my saving grace. And in other people's examples, my sweetheart Annie, her father was her saving grace. Her mother was sadly an alcoholic. Annie is a perfectionist. Paul Saltzman is a perfectionist. We all are in our way, but if we notice that and we breathe. So when you're about to make a film, the person who asked that question, bless you for talking so honestly about your nervousness. The breath, a single breath consciously taken, literally consciously taking a breath as if into your heart and breathing out of your heart as if out of your heart. A conscious breath immediately takes us from the head into the heart. And now the heart is not nervous. That's why I wasn't nervous standing with the Beatles the first moment. I was in my heart. I wasn't in my head. It's when we get into our head that we get into trouble. Again, the head is a marvelous computer. It's a shitty guidance system. So my answer to you is how great you're doing creative work, how great you're as intimate with me right now through Sidharth as to talk about your nervousness. That's a vulnerability. And when we go to our vulnerability and we live in our vulnerability, the world opens up. It opens up. Control just closes down the world. So be in your vulnerability, breathe, and know that you don't have to be perfect.
Okay. The next is, what would you advise a guy like me who knows nothing about filmmaking but wants to make a career telling stories?
Beautiful, beautiful. One, go to my friend Tom Schlesinger's website. Now, how do we do this? If you look at Schlesinger, of course, you have to know how to spell it, but let me see if I can quickly bring up the website. It's a simple name. And the reason I'm telling you to go to Tom Schlesinger's website, I think it's called writingfilms.com. I'm not sure. And if there's a way that Avid can put this on their website with this interview, I can find the name of the website. I think it's writingfilms.com. Tom Schlesinger, besides being one of my spiritual brothers, one of my emotional brothers, is the best story consultant ever that I've ever worked with. And the reason he's one of the best story consultants is he knows how to tell stories from the inside out. He knows how you actually structure story. So it's not just action. It's not just one scene to the next. It's the exploration of the human journey and the soul, the human soul in that journey. So, you know, the other thing to say to that young person is, or whatever age that person is don't stand in your own way. Again, breathe, come into your heart, and just imagine a film story you'd like to tell, and then just pull the pieces together. There's no magic to it. Well, there is magic and there's no magic. So just follow the cookie crumb trail of, you know, when I started my film, I wanted to talk to David Lynch. I didn't even know how to find him. When I got to his assistant said, "I'm sorry, David said no more interviews for a year." And I needed to do it within a month. So you just speak from your heart and you ask for what you want and people will help you.
Paul, I think you're giving some great advice, but we've got a lot of questions on similar.
I will, okay. Let me try 30-second answers.
There are a lot of questions asking similar this, so perhaps how would you like to advise me? How should I proceed to make a documentary about the culture of my area? I am interested to document this area's culture. And I'll give you the second question along with it so that you can, you know, because your first answers did touch upon the earlier question. Did you get to interact with the Maharishi himself? And if you did you get a chance to discuss your epiphany about your soul and your inner life? And did these come up with the Beatles too? So the first is, how do I make documentaries on her culture? And the second is, did you get to interact with the Maharishi?
Okay, I'll start with the second one first. No, I didn't get to interact with him. I wanted to, it just didn't happen. I had lovely conversations with John and George. And the best thing to tell you is that my film, which premiered last night, is not available today, but it's available starting tomorrow, the 11th, and it'll be available for weeks or months. And the way you get to see my film is you go to gather.com, and gather is without the E, GATHR.com, and you click on the logos for my film and you can see it. And the stories of the intimate conversations are in the film. How do you make a film about your community? All creativity starts in the imagination. I'm not trying to be simplistic. Here's my cup of chai. By the way, chai is my favorite drink. India, very important to me. This cup wouldn't exist if somebody didn't imagine it. So how do you make anything? You start with the imagination. How do you do that? Just close your eyes. Close your eyes and imagine the scenes you want to make in the film telling the story of your community. And just let it flow. One of the best pieces of advice I got from a cousin of mine when I was doing the film on the prom in Mississippi with Morgan, And there were a couple of scenes that I wanted, and I couldn't get people to talk to me. The racist parents who insisted on a separate dance for their white children. And what she said to me was, just close your eyes and imagine you're going to the premiere of your film. I'm going to say this, but I'll say it briefly. She said, close your eyes and imagine you're in a limo. You're going to a big theater and the searchlights are out and you look at the marquee and there is the name of the film you want to make, Prom Night in Mississippi. Now go into that theater in your mind, in your imagination. It's like a meditation. It's a visual journey. And sit at the back. And in the theater, imagine that the crowd, the audience is jam-packed and your film plays. There it is. It's starting to play. Watch your own film. What's being playing on the screen? And when the film ends, the audience gives you a standing ovation. She said to me, make the film you just watched. Make the film you just watched in your own mind. Because that's how you direct a scene too. How do you direct a scene? You imagine it. Oh, I'd like the camera to be here. Oh, I'd like somebody to move there. It's easy. I don't mean to be glib. Creativity is easy. We need to get our mind out of the way and use it as a tool. So just imagine and it'll come to you.
Okay, any key takeaways? Again, I'm combining two. Any key takeaways for documenting craft traditions? And you have documented several of them. Should a culture be portrayed even if it is politically incorrect?
I think that's a question you ask yourself. And I'm not being obtuse. We all have an inner soul. We all have an inner connection to the divine. Just ask yourself inside, or even say it out loud. Is it okay to do this? And then listen. Ask yourself a question out loud, listen to the inner answer, and it'll tell you. You know, to me, what politically incorrect is really about is something you're going to make junk food for the psyche, back to what I said in the beginning? Is what you're going to make harmful to people? Or is it going to be constructive in life? Whatever way you define destructive and constructive. And if you think what you're going to make is going to hurt people, well, my films hurt some people, I'm sure. You know, you can't take care of 8 billion psyches in the world. Some people are going to hate you and some people are going to love you. Follow your inner guidance system and make what you wish to make.
And key takeaways for documenting craft traditions, which is more or less talked about culture.
Yeah, just the same. You know, decide what you want to make. Go talk to people. Let them tell you their stories. Don't impose your story and your construct on others as if they're stick figures. You know, stick figures. Okay, you move here and you move there. No, who wants to be in that movie? If you're trying to push people around to fit your concept of how they should be, you're not going to find the magic. You're not going to find the heart. So let people tell you their stories. Just, you know, you can do it on your iPhone or your mobile phone. Turn on your phone, sit in front of somebody and say, tell me your story. People like telling their stories. They like being heard.
Okay, great interview, Paul. How can a filmmaker support the Black Lives Matter movement in a concrete way? I suppose this is connected to your Mississippi work beyond filmmaking itself.
Oh, great question. I don't know what the answer is for you, the person who asked that question. So once again, you go into your own heart and you ask your own self that question, and the answer that is right for your life will come forth. You just have to listen. So this is about learning to listen, not just to others, not just to receive others and listen to others, but literally to receive and hear your own self. And it's not complex. Ask the question. That you want to do that is brilliant. That you want to, as a filmmaker, support progressive, humane, humanitarian causes like Black Lives Matter, and of course, all lives matter. But that doesn't take away from Black Lives Matter, Indigenous lives matter, Untouchables, Harijan lives matter. So use your filmmaking to tell their stories is what I would say.
Okay, Paul, too many more questions, but alas, we've run out of time. I think you've given us such a grand tour of your work, about your inner journeys, about strong, very, very strong advice on how to show. The word I got was empathy in trying to, reach out emotionally to those people and let them reach you, and then to make these films in different cultures. I see our friend Asad Lalji of Avid back, and I think he has something to say.
Thank you, Sidharth.
Thank you.
Thank
Asad,
you. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Sidharth. This was an amazing session. I wish we had more time. I just want to tell the audience members who are here, I had the privilege to get the sneak peek along with Sidharth of this movie. I strongly suggest you all go online and watch it. It's a wonderful experience. Paul, we've obviously worked with you before, and it's been an absolute pleasure. It's nice, I have this one analogy. It's nice that you live up to the reputation of your namesake, being this multifaceted, multi-talented person. I love the line that creativity and love is so boundless and unlimited. It's something we all should live by and live with. Thank you for such a great discussion. Also to our partners, the Consulate General of Canada in Mumbai, for collaborating with us. And, they've been a strong collaborator for Avid for many, many years. And we've plotted and planned several Canadian projects in Mumbai. Thank you to our wonderful audience for being here. Mr. Bhatia has been part of our journey over the past 10 years. I don't know how many times we have called in on his wisdom and his friendship to be part of our discussions, in spite of his very hectic and busy schedule. So thank you, Sidharth, for being here as always. For you, the rest of you, just stay tuned. We have wonderful programs. We're very excited. COVID aside, it's just, Avid Online has just morphed into something that's so organic and interesting that we can reach so many more people with conversations, discussions, and programs that we actually want to do. And we're very fortunate to have the support of our avid learners who keep coming back for more. Our next live session is called Art 2020, Contemporizing Traditional Skills in the New Age. It's next week, and followed by a workshop or masterclass on appreciating Indian classical music with Sadhna Rao on the 26th. To find out more, you can always stalk us on social media, as I stalk many people, at Avid Learning or on our website. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember our mantra that learning never stops. Thank you so much, Paul. Thank you, Sidharth. Have a good night.